A great event. I was delayed because the governor wanted to meet with some program directors. And he met with several program directors and said, tell me the stuff that's not working. And it really was a great conversation. Yes. All right. Tell me when it's big enough for folks to see.
Yes, I figured I can get it.
Okay.
I'll need it.
Okay. So the legislative proposals at OEC, some of them are around, some are sort of administrative and others are really meaningful, and there was a change in the school readiness rate as well. That's in the budget that you'll see later. The first one is many cities have contacted OEC and said, we don't need all our preschool spaces, but we do need infant and toddler spaces. And with child daycare programs, the kids could switch between programs, could say, I want to have fewer preschool and more infant and toddler spaces. And this is really what our data tells us. We're down 25 to 30,000 infant and toddler spaces, and we have enough preschool capacity. It's not all in the right places. It's not all affordable. But so this is just really keeping up with requests from communities, so that they have the flexibility to use school readiness funding for infant toddler. It can also be used in family child care homes, so because they can serve infant toddlers and preschool. So that's important. And then also, we make cities go through all this work every year around the school readiness application. And I know the child care plan, the Blue Ribbon Planning Group, will be looking at this to look at making administration easier, but in the short term, we're going to look to change school readiness every other year instead of every year. And then the fourth one is this constant challenge around what does it mean to be ready for kindergarten. And Commissioner Russell Parker and I have worked on this legislation together just to be clear about what that means, because there have been some really strict rules about kids not being able to access preschool if they aren't ready for kindergarten, and we want to make sure that, you know, working with the school district and the parents, that if families still need preschool, that they can access that. So these are changes to make that happen. The other thing we're asking, which I think is important to talk about with the advocates here, is there's language in the school readiness legislation. A number of years ago, they put the rates up about $100 or $200 and said all that has to go to wages. But this language now carries on any increase. And in fact, those of you who complete your school readiness budgets know that really we're paying a per child rate, and that per child rate funds the child. Because of long-standing tradition, we make you say how you're going to spend it, but we wanted to leave the language that requires that any increase go to the staff, because it's really just it's a headache that's not necessary. 75% of the funds are going to staff anyway, so we just want to get rid of that language. It doesn't mean we don't support increased wages. We do. We know that rates are a critical part of increased wages. We just think this is just for show, because you can show you're spending more on wages, and it's a lot to enforce and it's a lot for programs. So that's changed. The other thing is the Smart Start legislation sunsets this year, and we're saying it's been a great partnership with the public schools, where the schools pay half and the OEC pays half, and they can run a preschool classroom. It's a great partnership, so we still have funding, and we just want to get rid of the sunset. So that's that. Again, working with SDE, we've been working on in a way that it is sensible for teachers who are either in public schools or working in early childhood with other bachelors besides early childhood to be able to get their degree. We have pages of statutes around what's qualified staff, and we're just going to grandfather folks in. We're just asking if we can grandfather folks in and make the qualified staff member requirements simple, clear, and also aligning with public schools as they're trying to work to get credentials teachers to be able to teach kindergarten, and maybe have the 1 to 6. So it'll work both ways. It'll both help the public schools, and it'll help us be clear about the early childhood requirements. And then I'm just trying to see, oh, really exciting. I don't want to, I think I'm taking too much time on this, and you all can read it as well. We're really excited to have a parent cabinet. It's made a huge difference for us as an agency, giving us feedback and information. And the governor wants us to put the parent cabinet into statute here and has funded the parent cabinet in an ongoing way. And, you know, Commissioner Russell Tucker, a lot of the great work at SDE has informed our work around partnerships with families. And we did a joint document 5 or 6 years ago that's really informed our work, so thank you for your leadership. And then licensing and legal, we have allowing OEC, like DPH does with their professionals, to ask for a medical examination if a provider is in an investigation or faces losing their license, that can be part of the consideration. And also aligning with DCF, permitting OEC to share unredacted information with law enforcement when there's a case going on, and that's something that DCF does now, and we'll align with them. So I think you can really hear, you know, Lieutenant Governor has stressed with us to work together, and hopefully you can hear these proposals. We've been trying to make things align. Okay, is there anything else, or is that? Okay, and in terms of the budget, is there a slide for the budget, or do you want me to just go over that? Okay, so the governor has proposed increases in rates, both for Care for Kids and school readiness and child daycare, starting in 2025 for school readiness and child daycare, and for Care for Kids immediately, you know, starting in July if the budget passes. Those are certainly the biggest increases either of those programs have seen. We know it's helpful, we know it's not sufficient, and we also know, which is why the governor is proposing to have a blue ribbon planning commission that can take a look at all these disparate pieces and put them together and have a childcare system that makes sense. The scale of the challenges that childcare is facing now are bigger than the state of Connecticut can solve. It requires federal action, but that said, we can't give up on the state action, and we need to do all we can here to make our system smoother. We have about 8 different funding streams. That could probably be 2 or 3 funding streams, but that requires a lot of study and statutes. And the other thing we found is we've been researching unmet need. I would have told you we were short 50,000 in cover spaces, but as we have really dug into the research, it's more like 28,000. So we want to build toward a system for the future that's grounded in actual data. And I was just at the press conference, what I said was, we now have a system, one that was built in response to the war on poverty, that is child daycare, and one that was built because of welfare reform, that is school readiness. And then we've got things like Smart Start that came in the 2000s around the UPK movement. And then now we've added 3 or 4 programs in 2023 in COVID response, each of them with their own requirements and administration. I'm looking at Kim Douglas, because City of Hartford putting all those funding streams together. Yeah. There's just no need. We need to focus our resources on a system that responds to workforce needs of 2023, not 1969 and 1995. And our system is, when you, those of you dealing with it, will just nod your head. You don't have to say woo, but we'll know that you're dealing with a structure that's outdated, and we really believe we can make a plan, reach more children, reach more families. You know, for example, if a family works 3 days a week, and all we've got to offer is 5-day-a-week, 10-hour-a-day childcare if you want a state-funded space. Otherwise, you're out of luck. I've dealt with many of those parents as a director. We just need a system that's responsive to changing family needs, and we've heard that from the parent cabinet. We've also heard from the cabinet there is still a need for 10-hour-a-day, 40-day-a-week. You know, not everyone doesn't need it, but some people don't, and work schedules and home commuting, it's all changing. So there was money in the budget for the cabinet, Care for Kids. We're committed to getting 17 million more in stabilization funds out between July and September to our highest need programs and our childcare deserts. So that's there, and then the governor added 35 million to the fiscal 24 Care for Kids to make sure that as we move toward an enrollment management system, that we can maximize the number of families that have childcare. We can maintain our workforce development stream, which, you know, we said we'd close in 2 years, but we're working on trying to keep that open with enrollment management model, prioritizes our highest need, teen moms, DCF moms, tandem families first, and then going the line with enrollment management. But this extra 35 million really makes the slope happen over 2 years instead of 6 months. And so we're willing to care for kids than would have otherwise been. So that's my summary of the budget. I'm sure there were a couple of things I missed. Yeah.
I'm just going to add a couple of things, Commissioner. The Governor's Workforce Council has been working with the Governor's Council on women and girls and the Office of Early Childhood to really try to focus on making sure that as we are training people in our training programs for the 100,000 jobs that are available right now, that the people who are participating in those training programs have child care while they're being trained, and also making sure that as people are coming out of our incarceration system that they are having workforce training and child care available to them so that they can be successful. And as the Commissioner has said, to make sure we have child care for our current and future workforce is going to take more than just local and state resources. It's going to take our business community. So the Governor and I have really been trying to engage the business community and incentivize the business community. So I think our proposal giving businesses a tax incentive to participate, which I think is really important. And we cannot underestimate the support of our federal partners. Rosa DeLauro and our federal delegation have just been really at the forefront of advocating down in DC for more child care funding. And so we're going to continue to work closely with our delegation, particularly Rosa DeLauro, who really gets it, and she's also one of the top leaders in Congress when it comes to writing checks to the states. So Bev, thank you so much for all that you're doing, and I'll get back to you.
Yeah, well, we're happy to take questions, Lieutenant Governor, if you have any about the budget or clarifications. Is that okay, Kristen?
Yeah,
we're up against time.
Online, but I'll let those in person.
Oh, one online? Okay. Well, why don't we bring the online one?
Yeah, what's the online one?
All right. It is school readiness grant cycle, mean that family child care participation will be delayed by another year.
Does moving to a 2-year cycle for school readiness means that family child care participation will be delayed by another 2 years? No.
By a year.
By a year? No, I do not believe so. I'm looking at my school readiness in the room, but no, I don't believe so. I think part of that is OEC making that apparent to school readiness councils that family child care providers are. I think part of that's a communication issue more than a grant release issue. Because we know family child care providers can be nationally accredited. They very often have degrees in early childhood, and they can provide high quality school readiness as well.
I think part of that question is typically in the off year of school readiness, councils don't necessarily open up to accept additional programs. And so doing a 2-year cycle, I think the question may be about when is the open competition for school readiness.
Some of that depends on the year. I know we were debating what, Kristen, can you look up what the year is in the statute? I believe it starts in 2024. We had a lot of back and forth about when that begins, but I think it's to take that.
Councils are allowed to, but unless there's an increase in funding or an issue with a program, typically they won't move funding from one program to open up space to bring in another one.
Okay, that's a good clarification. So some of it is But school readiness spaces are designated by communities, and some of this will have to do with the community's process. Okay, other questions? Okay, great. Well, I think I'm going to turn it back to you now.
Doing parent survey.
Parent survey now?
Okay, so we're doing parent survey. So we have University of Connecticut, Ruth Ann Buckner. Take it away, Ruth Ann.
I think that was the intro.
Okay.
You want to take that?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. All right, hi everyone.
Elena, will you tell everyone your new title as of yesterday?
Did you see me hesitating a little bit? Yes, so I'm really excited to share with you all that I have been appointed as Deputy Commissioner of the Office of Thank you, thank you. It's a really exciting opportunity, and I think really speaks to the strength and the growth of the agency and as a whole. So really looking forward to it. But I'm here today to introduce the work of the OEC Parent Survey. And so this is really near and dear to all of our hearts when we think about the role of families, when we think about the role of parent voice and how that can and should and does inform our decisions when it comes to our early childhood system. And so we were able to work very closely and co-design the parent survey in partnership with the OEC Parent Cabinet, with UConn, and local parent ambassadors and other parent leaders. And so this was a really exciting process. And our results was that we were able to get 2.5 times the results and respondents than we were back in 2020. So we're really excited to share this data with you all. And I'm going to hand it over to Ruth Ann. And Ruth Ann, I just want to thank you. This is her first cabinet meeting. She is our new appointee for the cabinet, representing the parent cabinet. So thank you, Ruth Ann, for your leadership. And
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be a part of this cabinet. Elevating the voice of parents to the state level is a passion of mine, and I'm looking forward to working with you all in doing so. So in regards to the parent cabinet, we worked really closely with the UConn researchers in helping to cultivate this parent survey. And we met with them a few times in the beginning to help to cultivate the questions that would be presented, some of them related to employment, childcare, mental health. We wanted to have a more of an insightful perspective on what's going on, how are they doing, how are families doing after this pandemic, where are we, where do we stand? And we helped to put these questions together, and when it was time to disseminate the survey, the parent cabinets met with the parent ambassadors, and we met with local agencies and had meetings where we had parents come out and fill out the surveys. I think that Anna said that we had quite a amount of responses. I have the specific number right here, 5,747 responses. So I think we're doing a good job here. Yes. Yes. So we had all of that responses from parents telling us what's going on, where do they stand, what do they need from us, how can we support them. So now where we are is the parent cabinet has designed a subcommittee group where they meet once a month, and they are trying to come up with solutions and ways they can contribute to helping these families based on the data we have collected and based on what parents have told us, is how can we assist them now? How can we help them? So that's where we are. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Can I just ask, where were those 5,000, where'd you find those 5,000 parents?
We did a significant amount of outreach, in part through the parent ambassadors. We had social media campaigns. By the way, I'm Eileen McMurray within the Research Planning and Technology Division of the Office of Early Childhood. So social media campaigns. We had our new deputy commissioner and our former research director get a spot on the local news. So we got a tremendous response.
So people were filling stuff out electronically.
Online survey, yes. And to be eligible, you need to be a parent living in Connecticut of at least one child 12 years of age or younger. So on this slide, you can see the distribution, because we know that the age of the child really can impact childcare needs, childcare access, job choices, concerns about the child's development. So we clustered them into these 4 groups, just to be able to see if, what some of the differences and some of the similarities are. And so in total, those 5,474 respondents, parents and guardians, had just over 12,000 children distributed across these age groups. And that represents about 3% of the entire population of eligible parents in Connecticut who could have replied. The important part, though, we'll be looking at different analyses, but the important part, based on this being conducted by the Office of Early Childhood in our parent cabinet, is that at least 75% of the families who did reply had a child who's either an infant, a toddler, or a preschooler. There were some older kids, but predominantly the younger children. Next slide, please. Here's a little bit more about the families who took the time to respond and to tell us what they're experiencing, which we so appreciate. Different family sizes, as you might imagine. Most families had fewer than 5. And there were some that were a little larger, and then fewer than 2% had 10 plus people in their family household. We also wanted to link that to the state median income, which, as you may know, is used to determine eligibility for a variety of social supports. It also gives you an indication of how that family is able to cover their expenses, including childcare, including diapers. Okay. Next slide.
Thank you. Thank you, Eileen. This is Shanae Russell speaking, Commissioner Vice Executive Secretary, and I also oversee the Parent Cabinet and Family Partnership. So on this slide, we have around affordability. So from the responses, 17% of families with young children reported spending more than 30% of their income on childcare. And then almost 1/3, which is 31% of those families earning less than $25,000, reported paying for childcare entirely from their own income. And then this, I just want to share this quote. So one of the parents reported, "Daycare for my children costs more than my monthly salary." And then
So why
28.
aren't those families getting care for kids? Did we tell people if they check that box, hey, you need to apply?
Yeah, it could be either not working, but I agree, this is an area we need to do some work.
Wow.
Yeah. Undocumented, they could be undocumented,
Okay.
and they also could be, that they're not, one parent isn't working, or when one parent's working, the other isn't. So there's some things, again, that the Blue Ribbon Plan needs to look at for how to use care for kids in a way that's friendly to parents. We're working 5/12s in the night, and her husband is working full-time in the day. I had a nurse who was working a couple weeks ago. I was pretty sick, but I had a nurse who was working 5/12s in a row. She had a 3-month-old overnight, and her husband was working in the day. So like that family would not qualify for care for kids if there's always a parent available to care for their child. I'm sure there might be some wiggle room in there, probably not 100% accurate. Kristen's nodding at me, yes, but we have to look at things like that to help families have a quality of life and childcare. So go ahead, Shanae.
I was just going to add further around that 25% that earning less than that, the paying entirely from their own income. From that, they reported that out-of-pocket childcare expenses of $500 to $1,000 per month. So just a little bit further with that. Next slide. So for the respondents here, we did break out those that did respond around their not being able to access their preferred childcare arrangement. So we broke it up based on the DCF regions, which we, the parent cabinet members, are also split up by that. So you can see here that by far, most of the regions, infant and toddler care is really, there's lack of it. There's not a lot of access around that compared to the preschool age. 53% of childcare they reported was too expensive. Another reason for not accessing preferred care was around not having space for our children. 31% said that. And then 10% said that childcare did not offer evening or weekend care. And then 26% selected others, so common reasons were inconvenient location of the childcare facility, plus personal reasons. Next slide.
Can you click, Kristen? Yeah, thank you.
So here's some of the quotes from the parents that responded to the survey. Career sacrifices. I have had to decline work opportunities so I can keep the flexibility in my current position to be there for my children. Flexibility. I love my job, however, I worry that childcare needs will cause me to lose my job or have to take a job with less hours, /pay, and more flexibility. Post-secondary education. I had to take my current job because I needed it to fit my daughter's school schedule, as much as possible. And it is still not a perfect fit, but it's close as I can get. But childcare and the lack of affordable childcare has made it difficult for me to return for more education and to pursue other jobs. This is the voices of parents across Connecticut, the struggles and the dilemma they're faced with on a daily basis. Should they go to work or should they stay home with their child? Can they afford the child care? And I know this is something I personally had to face as well. And I had to end up staying home while my husband worked because we just couldn't afford it. And now we're left with only one household member, one income to come in. You know, we're still barely making it by, but what can we do? And this is the dilemma many parents, families face across Connecticut every single day.
And let's be clear, I'll bet $5 that every one of those quotes are female parents. Okay, so this is like much more burden on women who are the ones who are trying to figure it all out and balance it all. I mean, I just hear female voices in every one of those comments.
Just so you know, 89% of the respondents were females. They had a lot to say. We really appreciate that.
Not a surprise at all.
Right. So I think building upon that comment, we really wanted to find the connective tissue between these issues of childcare, job choice, how parents feel about their children's learning and development. And so the question was, how much does your need for childcare affect your job choice? And so there's a lot of blue on this screen, meaning that a great deal, right? And so we know this, right? So a lot of the survey is really underscoring the critical issues of importance that we have been raising up, but to have the data behind it and to have some numbers is really striking. Next. And then we were able to also break it down by racial group. And as you can see, the numbers are high for every group of the Black African American population along with multiracial. This really makes us need to step back and think about our equity lens. How are we thinking about solutions and approaches with that lens in mind? Next.
All right, so the next section around employment and the pandemic. So this was really looking how the pandemic compounded the employment impact. So we found that 50% of the families reported that either they or another adult in their household reduced working hours or quit their job to care for their children during the pandemic. And then of those families, 34% had not fully returned to work at the time of the survey, which was from August to September of 2022. So I think a lot of this we kind of know, but to see the impact that the pandemic has had is just, highlighted, but we already kind of at a different level. Next slide. So the next section that we had was around child development. So we asked, as a result of the pandemic, how concerned are you about your youngest child's progress in the following areas? Social emotional progress were the top two concerns for parents, with 385 and 34% respectively. So you see social development as a major concern, emotional, mental, and we've been working really closely with the parent cabinet members in this area. We have several parents who are very passionate around ensuring that there is access and there's equity around those that have child development concerns and special needs.
Next up, okay. So data is wonderful and it's great, but we want to be able to really use the data to think about next steps and action in partnership with the parent cabinet and all of you in the field as well. And so we are going to be breaking down this data to one-pagers, right? Digestible one-pagers, there's a lot of data in the survey. Actually, so those in the town, the stakeholders in the town can see their data by town and be able to think about locally, how can we work all together to think about some solutions, and how do we tie that up to how the state is thinking and what the state is doing. We'll also be planning and doing a webinar to be able to share the results statewide. And partners, especially the local early childhood collaboratives, parent ambassadors, and the parent cabinet. Questions, follow up from this data, feel free to reach out to Shanae or I to follow up with that.
And we also, within the OEC website, have a page dedicated to agency data and reports, and a special breakout for parent survey information. So as we produce these products that Elena was just describing, they will be posted online at that link.
Yes.
Can you just say a word about how this sample might compare to the actual population in Connecticut? It's a large sample, 5,000 and 3%, which is a significant number. But how do you think it compares to the actual, population of Connecticut, just in terms of demographics and income and those sorts of factors?
Sure, that's a great question. We were trying to decide how much information to include in this test. So thankfully, we did have representation across all the different racial and ethnic groups that's comparable to the statewide population according to the census data. We did a slight over-representation of families with Latino or Hispanic backgrounds. That's a happy problem to have.
And what about income?
Let's see, we looked at the state median income. Christy, can you get back to that slide number 3, please? So we had under 50% of the state median income was 30% of the respondents, 50 to 65% of the state median income was 16%, 75 to 85% of the state median income was 12%, and 100% plus or above the SMI was 42%.
So how does that compare to the population of the state?
Well, for the state median income, by definition, that implies that expresses the need of families of different sizes, right? Because it's broken out by family size, and where they stand in the entire population. So the need is when you take all the numbers and add them up and you divide by how many numbers you had. The need is the midpoint.
Right.
So half of the families would be above it, half the families would be below that. Would be below that.
So like,
Okay, but that doesn't say anything about the distribution
well,
within that.
right.
That's what I'm trying to understand.
I think that what we can assume is if 42% were above 100% of SMI, that was slightly underrepresented. That should have been 50%. So families below 50% of SMI were overrepresented. So if you have 30% under 50%, that should be 50%. So it's slightly skewed, but I do think when you look at it, given how difficult it can be to get answers, that it's pretty close. You'd expect, right? Am I explaining this correctly?
Especially for an online survey, yes. I think it's a really good.
So it's not ideal, but it's pretty good. UConn felt pretty good. And to be honest, after we got the responses, we'd had groups that we were underrepresented. So the parent cabinet helped us reach out through their ambassadors to try to get more parents in the groups that were underrepresented, whether it be income or race.
And I will say, we do know that any parent survey is very hard to get parents, to respond, and they did such a wonderful job. So it's not going to be reflective of, the whole state with the population. We did get more than what we got in 2020, but I think our hopes with the parent cabinet is really to go a little bit further. So we got these responses from parents, but we want to go a little bit further and try to reach other parents who we haven't gotten to hear from and go a little bit further to see if we can get some more data to help us with their next steps and how we can inform the OEC.
All right, thank you. So we see that Paige Bray is with us. So Paige, we have you saying a few words about task force recommendations.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, great.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I apologize not being able to be here sooner. I was teaching. I believe that you all have a copy of the task force executive summary, which I could share screen, but sorry, I can't see the room. Would it be helpful to share screen, or does everyone have a copy in front of them?
We don't, so we're gonna see, can you?
I can share it,
Yep.
but it's not going to be the full document, so you're only going to see bits at a time.
Maybe if you wanna share it then, that's
I'm going
great.
to try and drop it in the chat.
It was attached to the.
Yeah.
I didn't. Okay, we have it, sorry, my bad.
Okay, okay. I didn't do a slide. I'm representing one of the subcommittees, and obviously as part of the whole task force, but neither one of our actual task force co-chairs for the entire task force was able to be here today. So I'm just representing what we have as an executive summary thus far, and our full report is being prepared for March 1st. The document that you are looking at the very top on the first page gives the actual charge and what we are to be making recommendations for. So, and then we provided you the name of the members of the committee, some of which I know are also on this call. And then I'm going to just say a little bit about the task force process. The task force process, we made sure to delineate in this executive summary that we had various outside information / experts come and present to the task force so that we were able to not only best understand our own landscape, but also understand other states and national landscape. We drew both from community-based expertise as well as early childhood education expertise, and also from researchers in the field. And you can see we also connected with another significant stakeholder in this work, which is the superintendents. Before I go into this actual overall summary, I want to really highlight that the three subcommittees really came around what was the emerging emphasis for the task force. Compensation is a critical component of the work, many of the work moving forward. And so that was not only one subcommittee, but it's also a thread throughout the task force recommendations. We then also focused on pathways and preparation. That includes there's higher ed, but also alternative paths that are being piloted, residency-based programs. So really grow your own programs. The national landscape talked about credit for experience. So we really went outside of our existing per box to understand what else might happen. And then the last piece is the licensure endorsement. Early childhood spans birth through age 8, which means it also spans the OEC and the SDE. And so how do we think about a credentials and licensure systems that would help make sure everyone who's doing the work of early childhood, all ages, all settings, are within a system both for high quality, but also for advancement and authentically representing what is the best environment for children, families, and community. I'm going to stop there before I go to any details on the summary and just ask, are there any questions?
Paige, it might be helpful if you just gave because we're just saying the task force, but it's just like a 1-minute synopsis of where this came from and the charge of the task.
Great, thank you. I'm trying not to be an academic who says way too much too long. So yes, thank you for that prompt. So the task force came out of an immediate partnership between the University of Hartford with myself as the lead and Southern Connecticut State University with Dean Hegedus as the lead for a competitive national grant to basically try to do this work. How can we look at licensure? How can we look at leveling? How can we look at the pathways? And we know all of that is connected to compensation. In the grant proposal, we at the end had a piece about working with the legislature, and we part of the about just over 20-person team that included higher ed, alternate path. We made sure to put forward this idea of a license that would be recognized by OEC and SDE, which was Commissioner Bai and then Commissioner McGow. So mine and Stephen's competitive grant made it to the place of the last round, but we were not funded. So at that point, we took the scaffolding and work that we had there and attempted to have a legislative task force put in place so we could at least build on the work that was done. That was then supported by the range of people, obviously through the legislative process. Because of COVID, we had a little bit of a delay, so we really only had about 4 months of the year timeline that we were hoping for, but we have done the work that we can in the time that we have. So from the beginning, this has been a community understood, articulated, and stakeholder built-in effort. I hope that represents it accurately. Please feel free to correct me, anyone in the room who would like to, or ask a question about that. I will just say the concern about the task force in the legislative session, before it became the task force, during the public hearing is that somehow our work would not center compensation, and that there would be some sort of abstract solutions that would not address the very on the ground day-to-day problem of compensation. And so that has been part of the ongoing commitment of all of us who were appointed by legislators themselves. Okay, hearing no other questions, or someone flag me if I'm missing it. I want to go ahead, and there's some clear language in the middle of the summary, but I'd like to actually just
have one question. I'm going to just interrupt Commissioner.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Paige. I appreciate it. My name is Andrea Martin. I'm at the Department of Social Services. I have a question about the measured outcomes. So these recommendations are excellent. And if some of them were implemented, or let me ask it a different way, is there priority among the recommendations? And are there those that we think, if properly implemented, would actually move the needle in terms of improving workforce outcomes?
I'm going to be very political right now and say I am representing an entire task force of very thoughtful people, many of whom are on this this call or in this cabinet meeting. So what I would say in terms of outcomes is, with the 4 months that we've tried to really surface the key issues, and what the final report provides is supporting evidence of how to sort of go to your next level of how those might be measured, or what the outcome could be. We know that all of these areas are interwoven and interdependent. We also know that each one has a different button, if you will. So the legislative, the issues related to compensation, it's an understatement to say they're complex. So I think people need to work with the legislation that we have in place. In other places, there's lots of the stakeholders here. It's not our role as the task force to necessarily find those others, but to present good information. In terms of, equitable preparation, which is the number 2 on the summary, there are some pieces in place that are happening. One of the things that the full report does is provide real examples of what those programs that are already in existence, what might it look to have lead time, and also being really conscientious that we are impacting either all or the most impacted groups. So, for example, I can say as a person in higher ed, student loan forgiveness or tuition replacement is hugely important. And we need to make sure that we don't further increase the gap between people who are coming into the profession via degrees, as well as people who are coming into the profession through work and community, because those are the disparaging gaps that we are seeking to actually close. So we're really trying to pay attention to that complexity in our report. How people choose to use that forward obviously is not the reach of the task force. And people who know me, I'm not trying to be political. I'm trying to really stay in my lane as representing the task force right now. Paige would love to have a further conversation with you about that.
So Paige, we're going to just stop you right there for just a minute and ask you to address some of the questions in the chat, if you would. And also, I'll just say that the good news is people like the commissioner were a part of this, and I do believe that the governor's budget and some of his legislative proposals address some of these things. So that's a good thing.
And again, ours was not to try to suggest legislation as much as to provide information that could inform that. I am only seeing 128 congratulations is the last thing I see in the chat.
All right, then, if anybody has a question, we thought there was a question, so we'll have that person speak up.
Yeah, there are 2 questions.
2 questions. Go ahead, Christine.
What was the process to assess the need of the family child care workforce and incorporate feedback from this sector?
In looking at the level and looking at the pathways, we have there's a representative on the task force. B, we have been using information from a range of sources, not focusing only on public schools as a setting, and making sure to include the full birth to 8 span. I think that you will see additional details in the report, but as a task force, we didn't like go out and collect data in terms of interviewing. One of the pieces that you see on number 4 is systematic data collection that continues to inform the workforce is something that we see there is a need. And to the task force with a birth to 8 charge, that's where our focus is. So the short answer is there's not specific data, but the group was represented.
And the
next question was, what action will occur in the future, and was any workforce survey done?
I'm sorry, I just didn't hear the part about what was about the survey? I apologize.
What action will occur in the future? Was any workforce survey done?
We only were utilizing, again, our charge was not to create more information as much as to consolidate and understand where we are, landscape that. And so we utilized those data that were available, either locally, state, national. And that, again, hence the question for further data collection, because from our looking, there are gaps in the data. That does not mean that there might not be something we did not find, but there are gaps in the data.
But to the question of, what's going to happen in the future, talk to your legislators, because they get to vote on the budget, and, You know, the governor's got some really good proposals on care for kids and childcare incentives, et cetera.
And I just would like to emphasize that in terms of those pieces, that there's different levers for different pieces. The step of continuing to support the Office of Early Childhood and the State Department of Ed working together in terms of what our next steps, that is one chunk of the next steps that we hope to see continue and further.
So Paige, thank you. This is Shirley Marcel Tucker speaking. It's good to see you here. And really just to underscore the collaboration that's necessary as we talk about early care and education, educators and those in our public schools. We're also in the throes of looking at modernizing our certification regulations across the board. And so that cannot be done in isolation. And so really will be important for us to continue to have this dialogue across systems. When I look at residency programs for educators, we have some of those already in place for our K-12 educators and more to consider. The Lieutenant Governor talked about the funding in the budget for educators and for what we need to do. Those are not just in isolation. So if there's any comfort to know that we truly are not just sitting here in this room, but that we are having these conversations that's necessary as we think about the entire continuum of making sure our young people have the best in front of them from birth to wherever we take this, I think is really important.
And my apologies, Commissioner Russell, I can't see the room. My apologies for not naming you before.
Go ahead.
Do we have any idea what it would cost to establish a wage scale for the child care workforce that aligns with K-12 compensation and parity with the K-12 system?
We do. That work has been done.
What is that number?
Financing tool. It's a really big number.
I know, that's why
I don't know if I'm at liberty to say. No, it's a serious question. I don't have the financing tool in front of me, but it's hundreds of millions of dollars. And it's a real big challenge because the child care industry is 70% totally private businesses with no government interface. If you just talked about getting the government funded system to parity, like public schools are government funded, it's a much smaller number. I think it's less than $200 million. So they're all different numbers out there for different analyses, but the wages is the biggest problem. And that's Paige is making that point. If we just said compensation is the issue, right? We're not drawing people into the field. We're not keeping people in the field. We're the lowest paid profession. With the pandemic, fast food is paid more than child care. For example, we are now last. It used to be clergy were behind us too, but clergy passed us, fast food's passed, and it's women's work from women's work. So it's a real challenge. So it's more than $100 million, between $100 and $200 million to take care of the state-funded wage supplement. What I can do is, because you're asking, we can make the financing tool available from the cabinet so you can see the picture of what that costs. And also, many of these costs are borne by the public schools. It's a big part of the early childhood system are public preschools. And so that it's the funding is not all from one place. Some of it is covered by, in the public schools, it's even, it's much more expensive per child. It's like $28,000 per child versus $15,000 per child. So we did do that work, and that's part of why we're ready to have a sort of a blue ribbon panel to really take all the data we have and figure out over 10 years how can we move toward a system that makes sense with compensation central.
Next.
Yeah, are there any other questions online? I just see we're in the room.
Can I just have one?
Yeah,
so
please.
It seems like this gets back to your earlier point that these are their federal government needs to play a role in this as well, right? Because really realistically, where's the state going to come up with the money that's necessary by itself to do that?
to give people a sense, like, so Connecticut was gonna get about $270 million with Build Back Better a year. It was $400 billion nationally, and instead, we're getting 13 million. So the scale of what is 20, we were gonna have 20 times as much federal money. That's when you get talking about making it accessible for families and getting to the wages we need. It's a scale, the scale of the problem is a federal problem, but the work of this task force is so important to help us have those pathways. Help us have those pathways to employment and help our higher ed institutions get in line, because we've been so mixed on our messaging that they don't know where to go and they don't know where we're going. So we need to be reliable partners for higher ed.
And just to highlight how this is a federal problem, during World War II, and you had all these men that went overseas, 16 million, and you needed women to step up and go work in manufacturing, the federal government paid for childcare so women could do it. So we know the federal government could do it, and that's why DeLauro and the Biden administration wanted to have child care as infrastructure in the federal infrastructure bill. And unfortunately, it didn't make it, but that doesn't mean that we don't still have people in our Congress like Rosa DeLauro and our federal delegation that believe in that. So we have to still keep hammering that home. So Paige, do you want to move toward the next phase of breakouts? Do you want to talk about how we should proceed with that? Or Commissioner, you want to do that?
Yeah, we were just going to take, I could tell that Paige, folks were reading the report and have read the report, and now we wanted to take some time to just break out into small groups and give feedback to this for OEC and for you. So if we could, I think if you just look at trying to get pairs of
Yeah, I think
threes.
if we did threes, or we could do even like maybe five.
Yeah, like there are 5 here.
Five over there.
We can split in half.
5 and 5.
I'll do
And 5
virtual
over there.
Yep, okay.
Okay, and Sinead's going to put the folks online in breakout groups to talk about the report. And Sinead, did they receive the report in their email, the folks online?
It was shared in the chat.
And it's in the chat, so you can find the report there. And Paige, you'll probably end up in a group, so get ready.
Thank you so much.
Hi. So I'll start with
I don't know how to do this on Teams either, or I would try to help. Perhaps could we just have those of us on Teams put ideas in the chat? Perhaps, perhaps could we just have people, if you can, I don't know how to help you pick up things, but maybe people could just put their ideas in the chat and then we can capture.
Yeah, we could do that, and then maybe a couple people could share. I'll mute so those in the room don't hear, and then maybe a couple people could share in this, on the online group.
Okay, so our online group can hear each other.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so I'm just gonna say out loud again, I think we're gonna put ideas in the chat, anyone who's online only. And if people want to unmute and say something, please do. I see Roberta has a hand up, but I don't know if you're hoping we'll answer.
I have a question. I clicked on the link, but is this for all the reports or is there a specific report we're looking at?
We are looking at the report that Kristen, the task force summary, that's the only thing we're looking at. I'm not sure, there's a different link that I think was for other reports.
Oh,
so we're
okay.
just at the 1:52 p.m. in the chat. That link.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
No problem. I know there's other task force members, I think, on this side of the call, so.
So I'm not sure what we're doing. Are we having a conversation about?
Oh, Roberta's waving. I think what we're doing, you can't hear Roberta? We can't hear you, no. So I think that's Georgia. I think I recognize Georgia's voice.
It's me.
There's too many things happening on my screen, even for someone who teaches online. I think what we're doing is if people want to say something or ask something of this group, otherwise having people at least put some thoughts in the chat so we can capture those. Roberta, I don't know how to help you, but we're not hearing you. Put it in the chat. I can read lips though. Do other people have clarifying questions or next steps or links to Georgia? Anything else you think we should be saying? Oh, yay, Christine.
I personally think that we should be really very clear about the fact that, and I think the commissioner did say it, this all hinges upon compensation. And it's, it would be important, I think, for the task force to have that number. The number around what would the number be to compensate, to create a wage scale and to try to align salaries with the wage scale.
Yeah, hopefully you heard my opening of compensation. Christy,
no N in there.
I know, I just, thank you. My brain was connecting. Please go. I appreciated your question. Go ahead.
Paige, I was the person who asked the question about family childcare, and I wasn't clear what, there was an implication that I didn't follow about the scope of the task force being birth to age 8. I wasn't sure what that meant for family childcare.
There was a family childcare representative on the task force, and I have to tell you honestly, I don't remember. I have to look at which.
I don't think so, Paige.
Well, there was some legislative component. I guess maybe it turned out to be just. So, say more about what youth. I mean, I know in our work that's a component that is important. But I don't. How can we better amplify that? I guess. Why don't I ask the question that?
So I guess I'm not sure if you, I'm not sure sort of what the birth to 8 reference was about. Family childcare providers care for kids in the same age ranges as center-based providers.
Yeah.
My experience is that school districts are not always familiar with the family childcare model. And if an effort is being made to develop a joint credential with school districts, which is probably happening for really great reasons, it also is important to include folks who don't customarily work with school districts. They may want to, but their interests aren't necessarily represented by school districts.
100%. So if you, I just want to point you to the number 3, that first step in terms of legislative shall convene stakeholders for the purpose of creating a tiered credential across all sectors serving children in the developmental ages birth to age 8. So I appreciate the flag. I think we need to name those settings. I will make sure we name those settings in our final report, because I think I can say we think of those as including family care, community-based care, not just public schools. But
Right.
we did have Fran come and speak to us. And again, had we had 6 more months, I'm 100% sure a family childcare provider would have also been part of the work. That's part of the standards that we look at. I'm not trying to be defensive. I'm trying to name things.
Yeah, what I'm getting at is that there are some issues that are specific to the family child care business model around compensation. There are issues that are specific to the demographics of the family child care workforce that have everything to do with equity, that have bearing on workforce credentialing and training, and aren't necessarily addressed or are only partially addressed by looking at the experience of family child care centers. So that's, that's all. I think that I just want to flag that there are some shared issues with centers and there are some very distinct issues. And to use compensation as an example, if we go into an exercise around compensation.
Christy?
Yeah.
Christy, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I'm the chair of the compensation committee. And part of the reason why I put in that proposal, and I made sure it came into the proposal, was specifically to address your concerns. Because if you look at the wage scale that the OEC created, it only factored in credential.
Right.
And so one of the learning that we learned was that that's not equitable, and that doesn't really fully reflect the broad spectrum of what we should be looking at what creates quality in a classroom. And so the recommendation from the task force is that we're not only looking at credential, but we're looking at degrees, we're looking at quality, and we're looking at we're looking at credential, we're looking at experience, and we're looking at quality. There was a model, a pilot in Florida that I got an opportunity to observe when I was at the NIA conference. And what they did, they created an app that, gave a score to each provider that gave them credit for degree, gave them credit for their Eckers score, and gave them credit for the years of experience. And it is feasible, if OEC is interested in doing this, to go beyond what they have created. And when you look at the OEC's report, they were saying this was the low-hanging fruit, was just to tie something to credential. But that basically just reinforces the inequity in the system, especially for family childcare providers who cannot attend school during the time when they're supposed to be working, and some other issues. So what we are proposing is that you cannot just have a compensation scale that only looks at credential, because we know that's not the only sign of a quality early care person. And if we're only focused on credential, then we absolutely disenfranchise many family childcare providers who have 20 years of experience, who may be NIAC accredited, but do not have a bachelor's degree. So then, based on the wage scale, a person who graduates from college with a bachelor's degree would be paid at a higher rate than a childcare provider with 20 years experience and who are NAFC accredited. And that's inequitable.
Yes, agreed.
And that's
Thank
why we
you.
put
Yeah.
that in the proposal. So I want you to be clear, Christy, and for anybody, we thought about that, and that's why we made the proposal that we did around the wage scale.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to hear that. I also want to say that we surveyed the family child care providers that we work with after doing a deep dive with them over the summer into OEC's proposed compensation scale and narrow cost analysis. And that was certainly one concern that they had, but but we also heard some surprising results, and I'll forward that to Paige and Georgia offline.
I think that, and I was going to say, Christy, I think we were going to meet at some point during the pandemic or my brother's illness. So obviously, Georgia, this is her lead, but if there's data or things you'd like us to consider or to possibly even get in the final report, please do send that.
Thank you. Will do. And thanks, Georgia.
No problem. And Caroline, I don't know.
Good. Yeah, Caroline, I'm seeing the same thing. Caroline, how can we help?
Yes. So thank you, Georgia, and everyone for breaking down further this report. Once you start, someone said once you started to name the different parts of the care that you're speaking of, it made a lot more sense. I'm a parent out of Hartford, and I often hear the conversation on the radio. They have these commercials that say, that they're looking for educators and early childhood educators, and it made me wonder, where do they fit in? If you have a student or like my daughter, she's 19 and she wants to get a certificated program to just go in and teach, like what does that compensation look like for her, who's actually very good with kids, done a lot of babysitting from like 14 and on, and so she has this other experience that, how do you even qualify that or quantify that in this type of environment? You know what I mean? Except that she gets a certificate, and then what does that pay look like for her? So it just you have me thinking, and so I appreciate this conversation. Also, in reference to the app that you brought, because I wondered if this would have anything to do with NIAC accreditation or anything like that. In reference to that app, quality, for a parent to be able to say, hey, this caregiver has great, their process in taking care of my child is wonderful. I really appreciate how they deal with the children, how they deal with the families, how they deal with me, and having that type of space to be able to give that type of feedback so that you're able to put that in your data, I think would be most beneficial as well. Because how else would you, if somebody they have certain certifications, but they don't have all the other things, how else would you be able to tell who's good from who's not?
Carolyn, I'm sorry. Am I heard?
Yes.
Oh, great. Yeah, I want to respond to that. Paige, can you hear me?
We can hear you. I think we can all hear you. And if you have something you want to say, will you make sure to flag us?
Oh.
Go ahead.
Hi. Sorry. So in response, Carolyn, one of the credentialing, baseline credentials for early childhood education is the Child Development Associate. And in that, there is a parent questionnaire that really helps the evaluator to assess that individual from the parent's perspective. I think that's a really good baseline to start and move someone up the ladder. And I feel like there are a lot of people that have a passion for the profession who don't have the education. And as a result, they're not being well compensated.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
I think that's also where the credit for experience comes in. Like, how do we make sure that we're developing the workforce in a way that we're honoring the work that has been done by people, the knowledge and competencies they already have, and then for the individual and for the collective workforce, build on that from the start, from the real starting place, not from just a random starting place that some program or license or level is sort of picked. Heather, yay, I thought you wanted to say something. Well, go ahead.
So I don't have a question. This is my first time being introduced to the document, and I only briefly looked over it. And so I appreciate there's a lot of work that went into this document by very well informed and experienced people. But I wanted to say I'm kind of thrilled with this concept of a license from birth to, I don't know if you guys said K. I feel like when I was in undergrad that we had at one point I thought there was a pre-K to K license in the state of Connecticut at one point, because I think I was pursuing that at one point. So anyhow, I'm just thrilled, as a child study major, as someone who was at one point interested in that pre-K to K, or pre-K to 3, I think it was. Now, is that right? Okay. Certification, to now see us go, you could get rid of that, go to, K to 12, because I'm also a school counselor, K to 12, to now go back and broaden that to from 0 to, I guess, 8 you guys are looking at, is just, the idea alone is fascinating and wonderful. And I really hope that, you guys are really able to lay that groundwork well, speaking to what Georgia was saying, lay it well and right, so thank you. Thank you for this work. It sounds wonderful.
I want to just echo that again. I'm sorry. I finally found my voice, and I'm excited because Georgia was saying a lot of things that I felt. I participate in a workforce development pilot, and I'm totally in line with what Heather is saying. And I actually am finding that when we get people to start at the base, and the CDA actually kind of works them into getting ready to go to post-secondary and to pursuing licensure. And early on in my conversation with OEC and some of the members there, that was, I thought, the key to the model was, starting, you could start in the high school level, as I think Carolyn was talking about, or, just out of high school to get a certified credential, but then continue and continue and continue until you are a state licensed individual to teach. And really, and I speak from a level of passion because I too am an educator, and I truly believe, and I'd love to announce this to the whole cabinet, that if we focus on early childhood education, we will create good students who are school ready, who then resolve some issues that we are currently having in our public education. So we really need the federal government to get behind our need to really infuse energy into this workforce.
I 100% agree, Roberta. And I also want to lift up what Joanne is saying in the chat about parent ambassadors and the local early childhood collaboratives provide, and having parent ambassadors assist with this work. I agree 100%. I think this is amazing. And so that's the question I would have. Is there any thought about the ongoing financial support?
I would just throw in here that I think I'm really glad that Commissioner Russell Tucker spoke up. I think, like her predecessor, there is really a moment of opportunity to be working across OEC and SDE, and from some of the national work for like those of us that'll be at public policy and things like that, to really pull from other parts of the country where we are looking at the complexities of early childhood. We all know it's more than tying shoes or changing diapers, but like to really look at that complexity of the levels of experience, the levels of education, the levels of what's particularly needed for a given setting or age. So if any point anyone wants to be more deeper into this work, please reach out to me or to Georgia. And we are happy to have voices, because it does feel important that we have a hand in stewarding our own profession and the work, the community work, the work with children and families.
And one of the things I do want to add as a caveat to my previous statement is I do believe that people need to be trained in doing this work, because it is really important work. And so while I think it's important to, recognize and acknowledge that some people have been doing this for 20 years, there's like research and information about how children learn, grow, and develop, that if you are not engaged in an ongoing learning process, that you don't really bring that information fully to bear in your classroom. And so to the extent that I think it is important for folks to recognize people's experiences, and I think it's important to recognize quality, and where I think that was like a light bulb in my head is like, you do have teachers that, they create amazing classroom, and they design really beautiful classroom that really supports the development of children that don't necessarily have the degree, but it's just something that's so very natural. And I'm just like, well, how do we fully capture all of those while still saying that while a degree is not dispositive, it is absolutely important as a part of a learning process for us to increase our knowledge, our skills, and our competency to do this work.
I have to say the task force our time frame was super compressed because of COVID and getting everyone appointed. I think that some of the criticisms of task force in general, that they can sort of not necessarily address real world problems, but big solutions. We've really tried to stay grounded in what's happening and changing by the week, by the minute, in early childhood. So again, thank you all for your voices, and please, if you think you have anything to add, feel free. I'll just volunteer myself. I will not volunteer George's email, but my email is literally bray@hartford.edu. We really would welcome. I would filter that up through to the task force as we round out our final month here.
And before you go,
thank you, Georgia and Paige. Again,
most welcome.
You're both saying a lot of things, and I have just been a student of evaluating a cohort of 22 frontline early childhood education workers who have varying pieces of the puzzle that I'm walking through a CDA, which doesn't have hasn't been given enough credence. The material that's in there that we've totally focused in on is that which Georgia was speaking to, an understanding of Piaget and Vygotsky and endless Maria Montessori, to be able to infuse that into the lives of individuals that are going to go the next morning into a classroom and understand behaviors, growth, development, and really are in line it's been very exciting for them. Very exciting. And I would really like to participate in any way that I can to help and lift the future of the task force. And so I did grab your email page, and please forward my information on to Georgia. And Heather and Carolyn both, I heard a lot of what you said.
And what I and I would echo that, because we're hearing that as well, Roberta, in our, so we do a self-study with family childcare providers. And the two things that we're hearing is that, for the folks who are going to school,
About the task force and recommendations and
they're seeing how
conversations about other things.
that knowledge.
And this is why we need.
But so report there's not.
Georgia, we're coming back. Can you hear us?
Yes.
We're back.
Thank you. My voice.
Georgia, do you want to
being broadcast to the room.
Your group, Georgia? I know you were sort of in a big.
Can you say? I can hear you.
I can see your dot. Do you want to report out at all?
To my group? From my group?
Yeah. Big group.
Sure.
What was your conversation about?
My group? Our group?
Yeah.
Okay. So we were mostly focused on the conversation around compensation, and Christy raised the concern about recognizing the complexity of including the experiences of family childcare providers in all of the conversation that we're having about compensation. And one of the feedback that I gave as the chair of the compensation committee is that, there was a lot of work that OEC did on creating a wage scale, but the wage scale really just focused on credential. And, in the document that was created, the document did call out the fact that we have to consider compensation, and we have to think about experience. But this is what we're going to do right now, because that was the low hanging fruit and that was something that could be created. But from our perspective, that does also, have the double-edged sword of building in inequities, and especially for a provider. And the example that we gave was, you could have a family daycare provider who's worked for 20 years, NAFC accredited, but doesn't have a bachelor's degree. And that person will, in a wage scale, would be at a disadvantage of being compensated for those years of experience and the quality that they have incorporated into their program, in comparison to a 25-year-old who graduate college with a bachelor's degree. And so if we're thinking about equity and we're thinking about how to ensure that folks are really fully recognized for their work, we have to recognize that while a degree is important, it's not dispositive of the quality that's going to be created in the classroom. So I think, and everybody was echoing that we really have to think about how to incorporate experience and also incorporate quality into that space. And to also recognize that there are people that are going to be coming into the space that have a passion for working with children, maybe babysitting and working with children for quite a while, but a degree may be a barrier for them to enter into the space. So then how do we make sure that what we're creating incorporates all of those experiences and create a pathway for all of those folks who want to come in? We also talked about the fact that while we do want to focus on experience and we do want to focus on quality, that you really cannot fully do all of those things well if you don't have the knowledge, skill, and competency. And so we talked about the fact that, people do need to go back to school. And you know, I think it was Roberta who mentioned understanding Montessori, understanding Piaget, understanding Vygotsky. And Commissioner, you were in our program and you saw some of our workforce trainees, and we were talking about Maslow, we were talking about Vygotsky. And so there has to be some level of training, education that is a part of this work, because then we can basically say, well, I've been doing this for 20 years, but if we don't really fully understand brain development, we don't understand how trauma affects the physiology of a child, then how then do we respond in a way to those children? So I think we have to recognize, you know, experience, we have to recognize quality, but we cannot dismiss. There's true value in going back and getting credential, or even learning and getting the skill and the knowledge and competency, but we should not overemphasize credential to the exclusion of those other things. So that was our conversation.
Georgia, your conversation really sums up the conundrum of early childhood, that there are experiences that bring skills, and there are credentials, and there's a lot of things in between, and there's a lot of valuable steps in between. Paige, I don't know if you want to respond to that and how the task force was thinking about some of those issues. And if you don't, that's okay.
We just had a generative conversation on our side, and I think it's just a good reminder of how complex the work is and how we have to keep amplifying each other. We are all, you know, in this, you know, from a higher ed perspective, I know the value added, but I also know the barriers. You know, how do we work across the state to make sure we're honoring the work that is there, moving the profession forward? We know there's a lot of good opportunities to learn from other states and from the national landscape. And we know, to underscore, it's a federal problem. And that's why the task force has really tried to make sure it's clear that there is not a solution here that isn't intertwined with compensation, that we just can't have the equity issue addressed. And that's equity for the field, and that's some of our societal work too. So I think the full report will obviously get more than the executive summary, but I'm certainly grateful that we could present that. And at least in our team chat, we had some really generative conversation. Thank you.
That's awesome. And Georgia, I just have to give you a shout out, because my visit with your 3 students who were in your pipeline project was among my best days over the past 6 months. They were unbelievable how they're thinking about theorists and child development, and to see them in the classrooms getting paid while they're getting trained. This is what the governor has been asking us about for a long time. So thank you for taking that leap of faith with us as we put out funding for the apprenticeship. Roberta.
Commissioner Bai, I just want to say to you and the cabinet as a whole that we have seen amazing things, and many of the cohort 1 that are wrapping up remember your visit to our platform. And I have seen, and their centers have seen, an enormous, tremendous growth in these workers. And so it just really excites me for our continued process, and whatever we need to do to really let the federal level know that that's where, we have to come together as a nation. And Connecticut has really made a big impact, but we need, regional support too. Everybody's having this issue. So kudos to the task force too for just doing a little under a short amount of time. And thank you again, because these students, I don't know, when they meet and they're engaging with you, it made an impact on them.
Yeah, it really is. It might, if people would like, we could invite some of the workforce pipeline participants to the next cabinet and try to think with them, because we have 1.5 million out there, but we have 6.5 million to spend over the next 17 months, and need to think about how do we best do that. And that could be a really good topic for the cabinet to help us think through something. But Kristen, I don't know what the required reports are, but I think what everyone here is talking about, the workforce, that's the issue. So maybe we should just, Lieutenant Governor, think about some of these innovative approaches and, you know, Charlene, maybe hearing about some of your innovative residency programs that could translate to early childhood and just dig in there. So yes, it is really inspiring. These young people giving early childhood a shot in places like Georgia's where they're also getting child development information as they're working. And they love the kids, but they have so many questions and they're learning, they're young and they're learning to go to work every day and that the kids rely on them. And, you know, what's better than a 2-year-old running in your arms? That can make you go to work. Okay, other questions? Yes.
So with the recommendations, I'm sorry, looking at the recommendations, number 3 concerns me.
Okay.
Just because of workforce. When we're looking at a birth to grade 3 recommendation, we're going to lose lots of qualified teachers in early childhood because of that recommendation. I mean, if that were to go through.
That's a really great point. There is an early childhood, for those who aren't early childhood, just many of our best teachers end up leaving for the public schools because of the compensation. So your concern is a license that was birthed to 3rd grade would train folks, but they'd all end up in the public schools. Paige, I'm sure that the task force thought about this. We all think about this, which is why we keep saying, you know, if early childhood compensated better, we wouldn't have the flight. But I don't know, Paige, if you want to respond, but I think it's a really good red flag.
I appreciate the flag, definitely. It's one we have been addressing. I think one of the things that happens for many of us when we see SDE, we think public school in the same way we had the conversation with the superintendent's organization, but any tiered or leveling credential would be, ideally, would be jointly Office of Early Childhood and State Department of Ed. And so we're not just talking about the settings of public schools, we're talking about all settings, which would include family providers, and that level, that all of those would be visible and valued in that work. So we are very aware of the concern, and this is part of why compensation matters too. We're very aware that we don't want to create something that, and we see this in other states that this has happened, so we have been paying attention to that. We don't want to create a drain or a draw away from too. That's why to be thoughtful about how that would be put forward and how that would be put forward with recognition for compensation. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, go ahead.
But it's also not just the compensation. It's the fact that in early childhood, we work long hours. We're open all year long. Public schools aren't, and that's why we lose them.
Yeah, it's more than just the compensation, there's a quality of life.
Yeah.
May I just add that and again, I apologize if compensation in the way that the task force is thinking about it is the most broad definition of that. So we're not just talking about pay, we're talking about healthcare, we're talking about access to family leave, we're talking about a place for your own children to be able to be cared for while you're doing your work, like many other people in the workforce. We're also talking about looking at the compensation for how many hours of work. So there's some notion of different levels of maybe expertise or specialization, but we also know, there are multiple longer days in a childcare setting, or certainly in a family care setting, than there are in a public school bound by certain hours with a lot of different other supports. So when we say compensation, we mean that entire package, which again, the executive summary doesn't drill down into, but you'll see more of that in the full report.
Great, thank you so much. Karen.
So I think all roads point back to compensation. I think everyone knows that. It's a big circle. The one thing I want to kind of call out is demonstration of competencies, right? So going back to 2013-14, when the Office of Early Childhood was created, we began engaging in conversations around what do we want for our early childhood teachers what's best for kids, right? And for me, it goes back to what is best for kids. And at that point, there were really intense conversations around not everybody can do this. You need to demonstrate that you have the competencies in early childhood. It's why we moved away from a degree in anthropology with 12 credits, because we wanted more for our kids. And I just don't want to lose sight with this that there still needs to be some way to demonstrate competencies in early childhood, not just a way to bring people back in the field because there's a shortage. We all know that, right? So it's this big chicken and the egg that we're trying to have qualified staff members, but we're also trying to have staff members in our program. Again, leading back to compensation. And so I don't want the lack of having an answer to the compensation issue mean that we're willing to accept less than really good early childhood practices for kids and families.
Yeah, I think, Karen, that's the crux of the challenge right now, that we're all facing it. And when we met with directors from across the state, they said they were like grabbing people at Walmart, anywhere they could find somebody, will you come work here?
And it's a reality. I mean,
but that they needed, so that's what they were doing to keep the classrooms open. But then what they needed OEC to be thinking about was, how do we support, get child development just available all the time from the CSUs, which we're working on. But, you know, that if that's going to be the case, then it's incumbent on us to provide the training and pay people while they're getting trained, you know, and get them into entry level programs. So we heard that loud and clear from directors. Yeah, Paige.
So Karen, I want to underscore that 1000% and say again, in the full report, you'll see some pointing to those levels as not just being about pay, but about being related to competencies. And I just feel also compelled to say the workforce issue is critical, imperative. It's part of our social structure that we need to address. And we also need to set next to it really appropriate developmental and cultural experiences for our children, right? So we need to fix the workforce problem and at the same time, yes, and making sure those experiences, which to me speaks to the competencies you're talking about.
Okay, Ina.
To echo folks and not sound like a broken record, but just add to my little flair to this, number 3. I also want to make sure people understand that in the last decade, there's been so many internal conversations with many folks in this room and online about the curriculum and credentials, and there's also been hesitation from the educator's point of view when those changes take a 180 spin, a drastic change. It seems that finally between the educator's role and OEC, there's so much alignment of how to move forward. And I just want to be weary of making so many drastic changes with that, with credentials and endorsement, that it becomes more cumbersome and confusing with the workforce that we have and that we're developing. Compensation, absolutely. I think we all agree that we need transformational change and most people are in alignment. But when it comes to licensing and education and criteria, there's a path, and this was a little alarming. It seemed like it was a deviation of what was been communicated between the state and educators.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Eva. I think that's a really important point, and appreciate that. We do have, our statutes are really convoluted and difficult, and we are putting forward a proposal this year to make an improvement, but then this has to align, is your point, right? Like we've got to make it all work together. Yeah. Georgia, you have your hand up again?
I actually will share with Edie, that was my big concern as well as a provider. And so, you know, I'm going to always call that out. But I also want to bring back the point to what Karen said about competency. And this is why I'm so passionate about the apprenticeship model, because the apprenticeship model really does create that pathway for folks. And, you know, we've been doing this for a couple of years, and I just want to so thank the OEC for the funding that we have to really do this at a scale that we've been wanting to do it. and to basically just begin to get to see the benefits of pairing experience, pairing a cohort type method to training people, and also finding alternative ways to train people around those critical skills around child development and such. And we're doing these things in the workforce pilot in these really innovative ways. And I think that should point to a pathway forward for how we get to a place where we are focused on competency, and not to the exclusion of degrees, because I do believe in degrees, and I believe that a degree does demonstrate a level of competency, but recognizing that degree is not the singular path for every single person, and that there are true barriers for many people, especially people of color, to get there. And that, the workforce pilot, again, I'm so glad that we have money to do this for the next 2 years or so. And our vision is to support other providers across the state to create their own model. But I just want to say the workforce pilot has been a really wonderful pathways to address some of those issues.
Great. I'm afraid this room is going to be used again, so I just want to give a couple minutes for public comment on topics other than workforce. Are there other topics? Because the public looks like about 15 people have been hanging in there out there, or other comments here. Caroline.
Hi, yeah, I didn't bring this up earlier. The conversation seemed to move so fast for me, but really quickly, I just have a concern as a parent for the emergency food stamps and other benefits that have stopped this month. There are a lot of families that are going to be suffering when it comes to access to food, especially as things have gone up tremendously. You go to the grocery store, I don't have to tell you guys what it looks like. I'm sure everyone is shopping, you see it, so you know. But not only that, the lunch, it breaks my heart that there's no money for the free lunch in Connecticut for our students, and I see that some communities are serving breakfast.
Caroline, just want to stop you right there, because we just had a special session to make sure that universal free lunch is available at all public schools everywhere in Connecticut till the end of the year.
Oh, that is awesome. Thank you so much.
I'm really fortunate to be sitting next to our new commissioner of the Department of Social Services. Thank you so much for as busy as you were making time for us today. Didn't get to give you a proper introduction, the way you and I both came in late.
There are some awesome.
Do you want to speak to the SNAP?
Sure, I can speak to the SNAP. Caroline, thank you for your question and the opportunity to answer it. I do hear you completely. The issue is that the federal money that was available to offer that additional $95 in SNAP benefits has stopped with the unwinding of what the federal government has determined is the end of the public health emergency. So when the public health emergency was declared as over, and we all have our opinions about whether or not that really is true, that's the declaration that's been made. That additional $95 has ended. You're absolutely right. We don't, as many states don't have any additional resources to continue that $95, and every state is facing the same circumstance. But we have put out some messages on social media and on our website about other resources that might be available and ways in which the available resources can be budgeted. I know that is not nearly the answer that families are looking for, but unfortunately that is where we are right now.
Thank you.
I love that you raised that here. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does, and I appreciate the time. Thank you.
I appreciate you advocating. So as we wrap up, I have two announcements. One is that we'll be sending out future cabinet meeting dates, but two is the blue ribbon panel that the governor is convening. It'll be about 18 folks. There's some overlap with the cabinet, but we're going to need the cabinet as well. And so we're working out all the reporting structures how that works. And then you'll get the next cabinet meeting. And I think what we might try to do is maybe call a joint workforce meeting where the cabinet and the panel come together to hear what's happening now, to set the baseline. And so we'll work on sort of an extra meeting that you can come if you can, don't if you can't. But we're so grateful for your participation today. And Lieutenant Governor, thank you so much for
Thank you
your
all
attendance.
so much.
Okay, great, break.
We are adjourned. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Have a great one. Thank you.